What is up, Brad fans? Thank you for being here. I hope you are doing well. I am very, very excited to bring you this conversation episode with Sarah Bell. I saw Sarah on Twitter tweeting some things about Ebola, and as you know, that being one of the most covered topics on this show, I reached out to see if she would be kind enough to give us her time on the show, and she did. She agreed. Now, Sarah is a anthropologist. She's doing her PhD at Oxford Brookes University. So she didn't come to the Ebola situation from a biology or an infectious disease angle. And as you'll hear in the conversation, it was really a couple chance occurrences that led her into the research that she's now doing, which is specifically looking at the effect of the sensitization messages. So that's a term that gets used for the public health measures or messaging that was going out in Sierra Leone specifically, I think in broadly across Africa, during the big Ebola outbreak, West African Ebola outbreak that we all remember. And her work focused on the ban or messages to the local people to not eat wild game, or as you've heard it called, bushmeat. And surprisingly, this had some kind of a backfire effect. I'll let her explain it. She does a great job communicating what her work is about, but obviously you can see how this topic of effective messaging and communication during a public health crisis is really relevant for where we are today. So we also drifted into the situation that we are in today, the coronavirus pandemic, some of the conspiracy theory stuff that we're seeing around that. And Sarah also does some great conservation work, and we talk about a project that she started called Pan Verus. So Panverus. I screwed up the pronunciation during the conversation, and it was very embarrassing, but it's the Pan Verus Project. And it's a great project that is whose goal is to provide employment opportunities to local people in Sierra Leone that don't involve them destroying the environment. So there's a lot of illegal logging and this kind of stuff that goes on. And they're dedicated to providing an alternative to these kind of things. And in doing so, provide like an actual living wage for people on the ground and working with them to best help what their situation is. So taking care of their needs rather than, someone else's. Really great project. You can go to the website panverus.org, donate, get involved, follow, see what they're doing in that work. I want to thank Sarah again for taking the time to speak with me and wish her luck on her thesis that she is writing and will defend soon. But before we get to that, you know the drill. Rate, subscribe, follow, all those things. Please comment wherever you're getting your podcasts. Follow us on Twitter and Instagram at 2bradforyou. I am at bvandperdon on both those platforms. Our website is 2bradforyou.wordpress.com. Get in touch. Leave us a message, a question, a voice message, whatever you want to do to be part of the show. Please reach out. I'd love to get more interaction with the audience. So comment, rate, subscribe, tweet at 2bradforyou, Instagram. It's all good. We're here on all those things, all those platforms, and your comments, your rates, your subscriptions, your downloads, all that stuff really helps our show, pushes us up the rankings. We hover in at around 200 on the science podcasts in various countries, so it's kind of cool to see it go up. So thank you all for that, and thank you once again to Sarah for joining us on the show. And without further delay, here's my conversation with Sarah Bell. Thank you so much for being here, Sarah. Really appreciate you taking the time. Just so the audience knows, I did find you on Twitter because of some tweets that you were making about some of your work with Ebola, which I'd love to get to. But maybe it's best that we just start. You can sort of give us, the broad strokes of your career so far, what your research interests are, how you ended up where you are, because it's so much more than just Ebola. You're looking at your CV and your website and stuff. There's wildlife conservation, anthropology, a lot of stuff going on. So maybe you can sort of fill us in your own words.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. So, I am an anthropologist by trade. I have degrees in anthropology and primatology, which is a subset of anthropology. Um, and I got into this work specifically because I was required to have some field work for my undergraduate degree. And my university was very archaeology heavy. And that was the field work that they offered. And then that just wasn't really what I was interested in. So I ended up going with a team to study chimpanzees in Sierra Leone, West Africa. And the day that I arrived there in 2014 was the day that the Ebola outbreak was declared to have started in the country. Um, so luckily, my parents didn't really understand what was going on that well because I am an only child. But we stayed in the country, not terribly long, just to do like a short study. And when I left, I was just kind of couldn't really get this out of my mind, like, this outbreak was happening, and I kind of, vaguely understood, like, okay, well, it can come from animals and this kind of thing. But I remember while I was there that this sensitization was really, like, heavily geared towards, like, "Don't eat chimpanzees or you're gonna get Ebola and die." Basically this, like, really inflammatory messaging around bushmeat consumption. And
Hmm.
I
Hmm.
wasn't able to go back to Sierra Leone during my master's because that was during the Ebola outbreak. Um, but when I kind of finished up my master's, I just really couldn't shake like what was going on and had just happened in Sierra Leone. And I was really curious as like how this had affected wildlife populations and humans' interaction with wildlife. And so my original question when I started planning my PhD was, did this Ebola outbreak and this sensitization towards like don't eat bushmeat, don't eat bushmeat, don't eat bushmeat, did this actually drive down people's bushmeat consumption, or did all of these kind of negative side effects of the Ebola epidemic, which really tied into like food insecurity, did that actually increase people's reliance on bushmeat? And so
Hmm.
that was the original question I wanted to go to Sierra Leone for. So I went back and kind of like bopped around, did a little bit of like a preliminary, like trying to find a field site, get get my feet wet a little bit. Um, and I realized that I was asking the wrong questions because people didn't believe Ebola was real.
Hmm.
Um, I have not spoken to anyone in Sierra Leone outside, well, very, very few. That's not true. There are some people, very few people who believe the Ebola epidemic was real, that the sickness was real, that that was what was being talked about was actually happening in Sierra Leone. And again and again, people were kind of drawing it back to, well, they told me that if I ate bushmeat, I would get Ebola. And that's never happened. That doesn't continue to happen. And so, this kind of dissonance between what was being communicated to people and people's lived experience was creating this vast amounts of distrust and disbelief in the whole thing, which meant that it was being harder and harder to contain. And previously, Ebola outbreaks have only killed maybe 250 people before this West African outbreak. And that was the highest death count of any Ebola outbreak. And now all of a sudden, you have this outbreak that spread and killed something like over 11,000 people. Um,
Hmm.
so, yeah, that was kind of how I.
Yeah, no, that's interesting because I didn't get that, just from the tweets and stuff like that. That you sort of you came into it, yeah, not from a disease perspective at all, but
Mhm.
rather like I came here to study chimpanzees, and then this crazy event happened that I just happened to be there for, and then again another shift, and it's like, okay, we have these questions, which I actually am interested in, and maybe digging into a bit later is, how does an Ebola outbreak where we know that it comes from animals. I think it's bats. Is sort of the current understandings. It's likely bats is the reservoir,
Mhm.
but it can be a number of different animals that might transmit it to humans, right? Like these zoonotic diseases. We know this, but then this leads to another question of people just totally just not believing that it was a real thing, and that's obviously in our current situation we're seeing a similar thing with sort of the coronavirus and stuff. And so what are your thoughts then on in terms of like what is it about the messaging? Was it just that you gave a warning, which as a coming from a biologist, coming from studying diseases, the warning would make sense. Be careful about consuming bushmeat because we know that these animals can be a reservoir for disease. But then you know that message, which seems reasonable to a health official, is totally lost on the population because they're not connecting um that
Well,
causality or
actually, that messaging is false. That's a lie.
okay,
You will not catch Ebola from so the thing here is when it's bushmeat, it's probably been cooked.
right,
Any heat whatsoever will kill the virus. Ebola dies actually at pretty low temperatures, all things considered. It's not something that you need
hmm,
to, like, boil for 10 minutes to get rid of. Leaving
right,
if you had an Ebola patient that maybe had some, like, fluids on a bed sheet or something, you put that sheet out in the sun, it's gonna kill the virus. Um,
hmm,
any any smoked meat, any cooked meat, there's no risk in that. And so there was absolutely no differentiation in sensitization by saying, look, the what's risky is the fluids in the uncooked meat, the bloods, things like that, getting into your own body. Ebola is not
which
like
is
co it's they're different
yeah,
things. Um,
right. And see, the thing is that like I even know that, and I was just using the wrong language to describe it, and like I know that it's like it's the blood, it's the risk of like when you're butchering it, you cut your finger, you cut the
mhm.
animal, that kind of thing. And so I even just screwed it up right there.
Exactly, it's so easy to do because we kind of say, we just can say bushmeat maybe, and I'm gonna also jump in and say I hate the term bushmeat, and I use it still,
Hmm.
and I really need to kind of have this shift. There's a quote by an anthropologist that I absolutely love, and I think it really makes us think about the word bushmeat. He says, "Bushmeat is to game what hut is to house." We eat bushmeat in
Right.
North America, we eat bushmeat in Europe, but we don't kind of villainize it in the same way, and we call it game meat. And we are like,
Right.
"Oh, it's so ethical. Look, we're, like, out hunting, and it's so
Yeah.
nice." And then, you switch over to people in Sub-Saharan Africa, and then you kind of, like, villainize it. You're like, "Bushmeat, and it's bad," and it conjures up all of these, like, negative feelings for it. We jump in with these conservation messages with it. But no one discussed the fact that it's the fluids, and most times when there's a spillover event that doesn't come from a bat, which is thought to be the reservoir, a spillover event being the moment when the virus kind of jumps from animal population to a human population. You're not
Hmm.
having repeated transmissions from animals to humans over an outbreak. You're having one single spillover event. Um, and usually that happens by people scavenging dead animals.
Okay. So
And
not the hunting that we would this
no,
term
it's
bushmeat that we're going to try and
scavenging.
avoid.
And they
Okay.
never even mentioned scavenging in these sensitization messages, and people do scavenge in Sierra Leone. If they find a dead animal in the forest, they're gonna eat it because they don't
Hmm.
have that much. Like, the people in these rural communities, they don't have access to a lot of protein sources. Guns are
Hmm.
illegal, hunting is difficult, so you take what you can get.
Yeah, exactly. So the messaging really was that's difficult because I feel like with science communication, you're always struggling to try and find that balance, right? Of like how much information is too much information to over what you don't want to overwhelm people with these with this kind of information. But in this situation, it seemed like it was, and I think, to add another thought onto that, what I've seen with some of the coronavirus stuff too is that there's an instinct to just do like a very blunt recommendation so that you maybe, and maybe I'm giving health officials and people that are in these positions a bit of leeway, but it's like the idea is like if we just make it broad enough, then we'll cover all of these nuanced situations that we know about, but that we don't have time to effectively communicate, like this is going to be more dangerous than this versus this or that. Let's just, 6 feet, stay apart 6 feet, and that's it. And when we know that, like, there might be more nuance to it than that. But in this case, it seems to have really like backfired.
Yeah, and I do agree that it's kind of this constant search for, like, the right footing on, like, how much is too much information, but, I that's why I think like, the research that I'm doing is not just understanding what people's perceptions of Ebola around this virus are, but I kind of went a step back and I said, "Okay, well, before I ask questions about Ebola, I'm gonna ask questions about what do people have any knowledge of sicknesses that come from animals before I even mention the
Mhm.
word Ebola? Because if we can say, okay, well, they do have an understanding of this, and in fact, people did. There was in the area that I was in, there's a common sickness, and I'm going to put air quotes around sickness. Not that it's not a sickness, but it's not quite what it's believed to be. It's called
Mhm.
monkey sick. And this monkey sick is what was described to me, it seems like a form of epilepsy. And people believe that you catch it from monkeys. How you catch it and from which monkeys varies based on which communities that you talk to. But they only one community that mentioned the sickness attributed it also to consuming the wildlife. For the most part, it was like, don't touch the saliva of the monkey and don't touch
Mhm.
the fruits that the monkeys have eaten because and so that there's already that base understanding. Look, it's not the cooked meat, it's the saliva, it's the fluids. People in Sierra Leone
Right.
are not new to sicknesses, they're not new to diseases. If you can just say, look, it's the fluid to fluid contact, then people understand that. Because if you're just saying also, look, don't eat bushmeat, then you're kind of um, taking out every other way that people use animals as well, and maybe they're not catching on that there's other ways. It's because it's not consuming the animal, and that's what was portrayed as being dangerous. So I spoke to people, and I'm like, okay, well, do you eat bats ever? They're like, no, 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 I would never eat bats. And I was like, okay, so you don't ever like touch a dead bat? And they're like, oh no, yeah, I use them as fish bait all the time. I catch them and I use them as fish bait. But there would not be that connect between, like, don't eat this for bushmeat, and they're like, "Okay, well, I'm still gonna use it for on my fish hooks." But that's
Yeah.
the risky behavior, is handling that dead bat with those sharp fish hooks.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah. Yeah. Exactly. You can easily see how blood would intermingle there. That's an interesting point, though, too. Is that you say, like, people in Sierra Leone are not, new to disease, but like really no culture is, right? Like it's part of
exactly.
being a human. Like we've seen the effects of it all over. Maybe we get, sort of in our over sanitized European, North American sort of lives, we're less exposed to it probably than most other places on the planet. But there's still sort of a legacy of this, so I wonder then, like, is, when it comes to specifically the messaging of Ebola, but then again, let's like sort of zoom out to the current, pandemic situation that we find ourselves in. Are we not giving people enough credit in terms of that understanding? Is it kind of a patronizing, I don't know, I guess that's putting some intention on people's actions that we don't really know, we can't really know, but it kind of feels that way, that maybe the solution is to, no, 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 people understand that there's different ways to get diseases, like everybody learns to cover their mouth when they cough, right? Like that's just a
Mhm.
normal thing that everybody does. So we do understand these things more than probably health officials maybe give people credit for.
Yeah, I think that it COVID's so interesting, and, I think that a lot of this miscommunication and, like, the conspiracy theories that have popped up around COVID, because they're absolutely off the wall, and I find it so, so, so interesting because a lot of my research in Sierra Leone has really come down to, like, tracking down conspiracy theories and kind of working backwards culturally to see
Mm.
what led to these beliefs and misunderstandings. So I've been doing a lot of thinking about conspiracy theories and where these conspiracy theories come from. And it's, I think that, well, I agree with you. I think that we kind of need to give people a little bit more credit. I think that what's happening with COVID is a bit of a more unique situation in that conspiracy theories, and this is where I'm getting into my like philosophy, which I'm actually like not super great at, and really happy that I was forced by my undergraduate university to take my one philosophy class,
Yeah.
which has ended up being so relevant to this.
Yeah.
Is that conspiracy theories are kind of like what we call memes, or which are these like repeated ideas that can be spread throughout a culture. And for an idea or a conspiracy theory like that to be so widely accepted, it kind of has to come with this, whole slew of other things. There has to be some general distrust towards bigger authority figures. So in Sierra Leone, you had that. You have a lot of distrust with the government. You have a lot of distrust with like foreign NGOs. They had a really big, very bad civil war there, 1991 to 2001, that was largely influenced by the diamond trade. I don't know if you've seen or heard of Blood Diamond with Leonardo DiCaprio, but that's
Yep.
about the Sierra Leonean civil war. Quite brutal.
Yeah.
Um, and so then you kind of see that reflected in, say, America, who's having some issues, maybe agreeing with the idea of this virus. You kind of see this, okay, well, there's this massive distrust in the authority system there.
Hmm.
And there's all these like weird little cultural things that have to come into play to let these conspiracy theories kind of blossom out of these fringe groups and into mainstream society.
Right.
Um, and I think that people were really critical when at least people that I spoke to in the States, when I was like, "Oh, I study Ebola," people didn't believe it was real, and they're like, "Oh my gosh, like, how could people see a sickness and not think it was real?" And then I'm like, "And now you think COVID came from
Yeah.
5G." And we're maybe seeing that your disbelief in them was maybe a little bit more geared towards their race probably than, saying that people aren't very, like, good for not accepting a disease. It's all about the information
Yeah.
you're presented with.
Yeah, that's interesting. I mean, I totally agree with that point too. It's the same with like, calling something bushmeat. There's a tendency to say, "Oh, those kind of things only happen in those places."
Exactly.
Like how could these people, and you see it I think in the current or the last Ebola outbreak that was happening in the Congo, there was a lot of reports of people attacking the NGO teams or the burial teams and stuff like this.
Mhm.
I mean, that's happened in these outbreaks. Um, and yeah, people have a tendency to be like, how could you do that? How could you turn against the people that are trying to help you? But yeah, now look in your own backyard and see the anti-vax movement, see
Yeah.
this distrust. So I think that's interesting. That's a good point to make, is that we're all people, we're all the same, we're all susceptible to this same sort of factors that lead
Mhm.
to misinformation. Um, so distrust in sort of the higher authority is one factor. Is there anything else? I mean, obviously, I think with the coronavirus stuff, social media, the way that it gets widely presented probably plays a role. Like, I don't have any data on
Yes,
that. That's just sort of
definitely.
my
Like,
so.
the hallmarks of a conspiracy is it has to be easy to spread and difficult to refute.
Mhm,
So difficult to find, like, really hard evidence to refute this, and and I think that that especially plays into maybe people's misunderstanding of the general field of science and the way science works in general, where we're not just like, "Oh, okay, I've done this experiment and now I have this very clear-cut, straightforward answer that immediately solves all of our problems." That's just not really how things work, especially when we're all panicked working in a pandemic, trying to figure out what's going on. And so any kind of like misstep or, okay, we don't have the answer for that yet, just feeds into conspiracy theories and makes them flourish, really. And then you have the issue of the fact that sometimes conspiracy theories end up to be true. Um,
mhm.
Not all of them. And so then you have to differentiate between what's a conspiracy theory I should be, lending time and credibility to like and actually investigating versus like what's just an absolutely obscene idea that doesn't make any sense. And largely that comes down to how many people had to agree with to this conspiracy to like um, help it propagate, I guess. I there was an example in an article I read that was like an example of a conspiracy theory that probably you don't need to give much credibility to is the faking of the moon landing, because that would
You'd be
require
surprised how many people give
but it
credibility to that.
I know, but it would require thousands of scientists to like all be coming together to agree, and like multiple foreign governments who were also monitoring the whole situation to also be faking it. Like that's too many people to be faking something is what it comes
Right.
down to. Um,
It's like, again, I'll reach into my philosophy, one class of philosophy from
mhm.
undergrad, and the Occam's razor, right? Like it's like how many the least or the least complicated scenario is probably the correct one, and so with each of these you have to add a layer of complexity. Well, then if they need to keep it secret, then those people need to keep it secret, and it just becomes less and less plausible. But yet we see a lot of people, you know, are still susceptible to this. And so I'm curious then, like, if your work in Sierra Leone has found, what sort of what would you have recommended different? Like, what is the solution? And we just mentioned that there's no clear cut solutions in science for these things, but are you finding any sort of recommendations, or what are you leaning towards?
Well, I think that it's kind of this it's just such an interesting thing because it really like involves so many players, and you kind of and I think something that I'm starting to question now is like, for me, I'm like, please just stop blaming bushmeat. Like, remove the blame from bushmeat because it's it's just a nasty thing to do all around. You know, it doesn't benefit anyone. It doesn't benefit conservation. It doesn't benefit the people who are suffering, who are relying on this food source for protein. Um, and it just doesn't help anything, but, like, why on earth does the WHO feel the need to constantly push this message, especially across the African continent? And they just did it again with COVID. There's a study done by, Bernard Sater, Seytre, I believe, um, and he looked at the COVID communications in 15 different countries in sub-Saharan Africa, I think particularly in West Africa, and he found 11 of those talked about like not handling livestock, thoroughly cooking your eggs to avoid COVID. I mean, it's
That
just
doesn't make much
ridiculous.
sense.
Like, these health organizations seem to go for this, like, kind of, fire hose approach, which is what Sierra Leone did in when Ebola started, where they just kind of, like, blast every single health message that they can all at the same time, maybe just hoping that something would stick, but that really detracts from everything else that's going on. Like, you don't need to tell people, like, "Oh, like, careful for Ebola, like, boil the water before you drink it." Like, yeah, probably people should drink clean water, but it's not going to that's not what's gonna determine whether or not you get Ebola. Um,
Hmm.
that's you're kinda distracting from this idea because if someone goes, "Well, maybe I'm not doing that one thing, but I'm boiling my water at least," Well, great, I'm glad you're boiling your water. Please don't shake hands or touch sick people. Um, you know, that's what we need to focus on.
So do you
Um,
think that there's like a linking, like if you link, you know, there's a you have all these health messages that, for different things would be good, like boiling water, obviously for a different pathogen and just in general, good thing to do. But for Ebola, no influence whatsoever. So do you think that there's in a linking of of messages, that also becomes a problem, because then people say, well, it leads to the mistrust, I guess is the point I'm trying to
yeah,
make. Because like, I've
you're
been
just
doing all these
confusing
things.
people, and I can
Yeah,
still get
confusing them. Yeah.
Ebola. Um,
Yeah.
and
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
and that's just good. And then why is anyone gonna have any faith in what you're saying if,
Hmm.
the so-called preventative measures that they're telling you to take are absolutely completely irrelevant?
Hmm.
Like, how
Hmm.
frustrating is that? And especially, like Sierra Leone, they just made a lot of mistakes going into this. They really ostracized local people in a big way. They made traditional medicine illegal when working with traditional healers would have been so much better. You know, these are people who are trusted and respected in their communities. And instead of working with that network who already has access to all of these people and knowledge of what their healthcare is like, because they can't afford to go to hospitals, they can't afford to go to clinics. The communities that
Hmm.
I've interviewed, they're a 2.5 day walk from the nearest clinic, which doesn't have a doctor at it. You know, another
Right.
2 days to get to a hospital, which that's a hospital that no one recommends you go to.
Yeah.
So, you know.
So you think that like sort of by working with those people, not only do you get an access to remote communities, and you get trust from these, respected people in the community, but that you could also sort of leverage the kind of local knowledge, that they already have. Like we talked about, like this idea of and diseases coming from animals, right?
Mhm.
That seems like a logical thing. Now I know that, and again, this could just be like sort of this patronizing Western world looking into the situation, but I know there was reports of having difficulty breaking some of cultural traditions and stuff in terms of burial and stuff like that, which were actually transmission points. So could you envision a conflict there, or is it not a big enough conflict that couldn't be resolved? Like the benefit would still be worth it to try and jump over these people and disregard them, but rather work with them.
I would hope so. I think, um, so I guess fortunately for the communities that I know, the people that I know in where I was working, they respected the rules about burials. And I know
Mhm.
that that wasn't the case other places. Actually, how they think the Ebola came like came over the border from Liberia was it Liberia? Yes. Was from a traditional healer. And when she contracted the virus in Liberia and came back to Sierra Leone, she died. And she was such a well known and prominent healer. And they will basically kind of parade the body. And
Mhm.
everyone will kind of come out and you touch the body to say goodbye. And because she was so prominent, they paraded her through multiple villages. And there
Right.
were 365 Ebola deaths from this one funeral. But they just, the way the sensitization teams went about it, and I think one of the reasons why you had this kind of like disconnect and distrust with this is because rather than talking like what they did in the villages where I worked seemed good. You were allowed to prepare the burial site. You just weren't allowed to take the body from where that person had died and move it to where they were going to be buried. That had to be done by the Ebola burial team. But the village, they were able to do like anything around the gravesite that they wanted. They were able to choose the gravesite. But if you died in an Ebola treatment center, your loved ones would never know where you ended up. Most likely, you would end up in a mass grave.
Yeah.
Um, and that's very troubling for people for very obvious reasons. That's not, we can imagine that being troubling. We would be very
Yeah.
upset if
Yeah.
our
Yeah. Yeah.
parent went into a treatment center, they said, "You can't see them." Um, and what happened to people there is anyone with a fever pretty much was thrown into a treatment center. And I asked a doctor, I told her, I was like, in one of my interviews, this Dutch doctor who'd been working in Sierra Leone for 8 years at the time, um, I asked her, I was told by people that they believe that like 9 out of 10 people who went into these Ebola treatment centers didn't have Ebola. And she's like, I wouldn't be surprised if it was about that, that's
Wow.
not that far off. She said that they just really didn't have any way of separating people. Um,
Right.
and everything was just like really quite poorly managed. And
Mhm.
what's kind of interesting is I think that this kind of then plays into this other level of like conspiracy theory within the like foreign aid workers within Sierra Leone. Because I've asked people, well, where are the intake numbers for the people who were tested on arrival? And then maybe it took a couple of days for those test results to come back. And I've heard that they all were lost in a fire.
Huh.
I don't know that whether or
Yeah.
not that's true, but I can't track them down. Um, and so that's scary. You know, any person with a fever can be taken into this treatment center, and then basically they just disappear. I
Yeah.
talked to people, and I was talking to this man, and his wife had a scheduled hospital appointment, and she went into her scheduled hospital appointment, and they came out 2 hours later and said, "Sorry, she's died of Ebola." Um,
Wow.
and that was kind of a miscommunication because they just had to treat every death like Ebola for safety reasons. But I think
Hmm.
rather than trying to communicate that, everyone just says, "Well, no, you couldn't die of anything but Ebola during the Ebola epidemic," and that doesn't make
Right.
sense to people either.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah. Exactly. Especially if you go in, you're totally healthy. You go in for a routine, whatever, and two
yeah,
hours
she had an
later,
appointment
like,
about her blood pressure, and then she was dead.
yeah. So then again, this seems to me like, part of me wants to have some sympathy for health officials and stuff on the ground where it's like you're dealing with a terrible outbreak and yeah, maybe there and lack of resources. I mean, that's the other thing, right? Like you
Massive.
don't have the resources to test everybody for Ebola as they come in the door. So you're using again the crude instrument that you have, which is fever. And then
Mhm,
maybe 9 out of 10 of those people don't have it, but now they're in the place where they're likely to get it, like they're
mhm,
in the so there's that, but then there's also it seems like, and if this is my personal opinion, I don't really have
mhm,
a lot to sort of back it up on or anything, but I mean, obviously we have the historical legacy of European countries coming into Africa and taking what they want, doing what they want. So there's a distrust and stuff there. So that obviously plays a role.
yes.
But sometimes I feel like, this maybe not so much the medical community, but the science community can still kind of do the same thing. It's a cool thing to go to some place, and maybe study something, but there's not a lot of interaction maybe, and I'm basing this on conversations I've had with one or two other people, so it's very very much my own opinion, but I wonder how much of that mentality is still there from organizations even like the WHO, which obviously is a useful organization but still kind of has this paternalistic mentality
Mhm,
of like, whether it's we don't have the resources to deal with this, so just do it, or it's like these people won't understand, so this is just what we're doing. Don't bother trying to explain it to them because we just have to get this done. Like
yeah.
how much of it is sorting through all of those factors.
Um, it's a lot, like, that just has I think that you just can't really, like, look at anything cultural in a place like Sierra Leone, like, going so far back. I mean, this was one of the hubs of the, like, human trafficking export point for the slave trade. Um,
Hmm.
it like, that it people kind of, like, taking advantage of Sierra Leone. A whole chapter in my thesis is kind of, like, going back and looking at how for hundreds of years white people have been coming in and taking absolutely everything. And then now there's not that much stuff left in Sierra Leone, especially when it comes to wildlife. Like David Attenborough's first time on television was going to Sierra Leone and walking around being like, "Can I buy any chimpanzees off of anyone?" Um, and then all of a sudden, you have all of these white people coming back in and being like, "Oh my god, you're catching chimpanzees, like,
Yeah.
stop that immediately, you're gonna die," and, like, what a ridiculous, like, thing to switch to, and, like, that's within people's lifetimes, this is
Hmm.
happening. Um, and so I do think that, like, especially, like, places maybe aren't putting that much. It's just so hard. Like, why are they so quick to be dismissive of people and the cultures and like trying to learn from that to like shape these messages? Um, I can take a few guesses as to why the people do that, and none of them are very wholesome. Um, but there was a massive call for like more involvement of anthropologists and things like that in the Ebola outbreak and trying to learn from these messages and or I don't think it really happened quickly enough, and it's reflected in a lot of things, like, the fact that they didn't go with people who spoke the languages, and they'd often rely on, like, very local translators, like, showing up into a village and just kind of like hoping someone that didn't only speak the like local dialect, like
Mm-hmm.
hoping that they spoke one of the more like widely spoken languages. And I think that when you do that, it's not only a little bit disrespectful for the fact that you just couldn't find someone who spoke the language of the people you're trying to communicate with, um, but that relies upon the fact that the person who you're using as a translator is going to be able to like translate potentially nuanced words about viruses and diseases and epidemiology that they might not have proper translations for. Like when I started working with someone who spoke Susu, because most of my interviews were done in Susu with the aid of a translator, that's not a really widely spoken language in Sierra Leone. And I really have struggled to find more than one person who can really adequately translate Susu with like
Mm-hmm.
academic words in it and stuff in a way that is actually understandable to people. And I had to sit down and with him and kind of go through like, okay, well, this is what I mean. How do you think that this is going to translate? And we had to kind of sit down and figure that out together. And that just obviously wasn't done. Whether or not it was just out of a mad rush to try and get as many people sensitized as possible, um, I don't know. But I do know that my research has shown that the more sensitization that people were exposed to, the less likely they were to believe in the virus.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Um,
And desensitization is just like these messages, this like these health messages, this sort of outreach campaign
UNICEF,
or whatever you want to call it.
WHO, maybe done
Yeah.
by the government.
Yeah.
Like it just all that information just got really kind of twisted up and misconstrued. And like people were, I'm like talking to people, they're like, yeah, UNICEF came in and they told us that like if we eat fish, we're gonna get Ebola. And I'm like, I don't know if someone did say that to you or like,
Yeah. Yeah, and I wonder how much too is like you said, well, there's the translation thing, but then also just, the old childhood game of telephone, right? Like where you say one thing and then it gets
yeah.
on, passed on, passed on. By the end, the message is so distorted. I mean, I am like, for sure, there's people that work in these organizations that probably are dismissive of local countries. That is for sure a
Hmm.
thing. There's also, lack of resources, crazy
Hmm.
situation. So it's tough to, yeah, it seems like a big tangled mess of things to do, but it also seems like that there's very clear kind of paths forward in terms of just sort of common sense and being like, look at, there's lots of, indigenous local knowledge that you can leverage that we need. It's the
Yeah.
same in my native country of Canada. There's a number of researchers that are working in the Arctic,
Hmm.
with the Inuit peoples and stuff, and they'd be like, they know a lot about this stuff that we don't know. So it's like
Hmm.
to just dismiss it as mystical, whatever their beliefs or something, is wrong. There's obviously you're just using two different languages to describe similar phenomenons, right?
Exactly.
So there's that thing, and it's like what interested me was you were saying how there was like a sort of call to get more anthropologists involved in this stuff, because then it is like we don't have like the even if there is a lack of resources, we could spend them more effectively in terms of making sure that the messaging and the health initiatives and all of that stuff, there's more uptake of it, because we understand where those breakpoints are in, where the message is either getting
Yeah.
lost or misconstrued or there's distrust and that kind
Hmm.
of thing. So, and disease itself seems like it's such a, I think we all now kind of have an experience of it, of how sort of personal it is and how
Yeah.
cultural, our responses to it is, but also that like we all kind of have similar, human beings all kind of have similar fears and reactions and stuff to disease. So this idea of blending, anthropology with sort of outbreak science and stuff on the surface might not make sense, but it's really, really, it's fascinating to me.
Yeah, I just don't think that like now obviously I'm going to be super biased in that regard because I
Yeah.
think it's so important. But just because of how much I've learned and kind of how I couldn't possibly have even like starting out and like trying to be as well read on the subject as I could going into my field work. like so quickly realizing that I was asking the wrong questions. I was wording things the wrong way. I was maybe afraid to just straight up ask people, "Do you think Ebola was fake?" Because that's a perfectly acceptable question. Like nobody kind of really bats an eye at that question. They're like, "No, of course not. That's ridiculous." Like,
Hmm.
no. Um, and so then to kind of like have figured out like, okay, look, there's so many links that we maybe didn't see, just like looking at the surface. Even as someone who was in Sierra Leone when the outbreak started, not even really being aware the entire time the outbreak was going on that people just didn't think it was real.
Hmm.
Um, and I'm just sure it's just because nobody asked.
Yeah.
Uh,
So total oversight kind of thing.
yeah, and that's what in my mind, that's what an anthropologist is there for, is to kind of like help people understand how culture plays into the way that we react to things and in our everyday life, and like how by taking culture into account we can do things better, like disease communication or like conservation. Like these are things that are very people centric despite the fact that they involve like other factors like sicknesses or wildlife, but you need to kind of understand where people stand with those issues on their own before you go in and say, "Well, I want to give you this knowledge." Well, I need to know what your knowledge is first, um, because maybe that's relevant and maybe that's useful to what we're going to be talking about. And just to kind of like assume that people don't have any knowledge on this that is useful or relevant is really a very dismissive thing.
Yeah, dismissive, and I guess we there's evidence harmful, like it
Yeah.
backfires, like we've just been talking about.
Hmm.
Yeah, yeah, it's a fascinating, and it's very cool to me that sort of, yeah, kind of stumbled upon this
Yeah.
area, and then the coronavirus situation happens, and so it's kind of, you're kind of find yourself in almost the perfect place for research, everywhere you go. So I'll be looking forward to where you end up next, because that could be an indicator of what what we should
I
expect.
know. I was When I was in Sierra Leone when kind of COVID really took off. I arrived there in January of this year. Um, and my university like pretty quickly shut down and said like absolutely no one can do research that involves like human participants, and doing interviews is obviously, I'm participating with humans. But because there were no confirmed cases in Sierra Leone for like quite a while, even after they shut all the borders and things like that, um, I was granted special permission to continue. I was like, "Wait, please, like, don't make me stop. This is so relevant. Like, I need to keep asking people questions."
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Because here, all of these conspiracy theories that I've been studying for the last 2 years were resurfacing and kind of twisting. And now it wasn't, oh, it was created in a lab by the CIA. Now it's created in a lab by China. Or I heard people saying, like, oh, China did this on purpose to get back at the States. The States did this on purpose to get back at China, and
Mhm.
like people's like interpretations, like foreign conflict coming into play with this in Sierra Leone. And then this massive fear. The biggest one about COVID in Sierra Leone I heard was Bill Gates.
Ugh.
Oh my gosh, everyone hates Bill Gates there, and I just feel really bad for him because I, I for all the things to dislike, about someone, I feel like Bill Gates doing his best with, vaccines is not one of them. But
Yeah,
there's this big fear that, Sierra Leoneans and Africans in general were going to be used as test subjects for these vaccines, which was not helped when some French scientists actually said as much on the news quite
yeah,
early on in the outbreak. Um, yeah, I mean, I was listening, like a lot of news nowadays is done via social media and via WhatsApp and stuff like that. And I was listening to all of these kind of almost sermons that were being sent around to my friends in Sierra Leone. Not and these weren't from Sierra Leonean people originally, these sermons. They were from I don't know where, all across the continent. saying like, don't let anyone vaccinate your child. Like if anyone comes near your child with a needle, like they're going to inject them with COVID. Like this is a white man's sickness. This is a white man's sickness. It was created in a place where there are white men. If it's not going to come to Africa, it can't affect Africans. Anyone saying that it can is lying to you. This is a white man's disease. So that was a really quite a different interpretation from Ebola, which was still interpreted as fake, but definitely is known to be, I guess, if you want to say that, an African sickness. Like
Yeah.
it comes from the continent
Yeah.
of Africa,
Endemic,
from our
to use
knowledge.
the science term. Yeah.
Yes. And so, you didn't have that with Ebola, where people they still thought Ebola is real. This Ebola outbreak isn't real because we
Right.
know Ebola exists in Congo. We know it exists in other places. We hear about it on the news. We have never known it to be here.
Mm-hmm.
And then so COVID kind of showing up the same way. They were like, no, 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 we have never known this to be here. So it
Yeah.
was it was brought in technically.
And I mean, you see this, like, I've seen this in people back home with the COVID thing too, right? They're like, well, I believe that the virus is real, but I just don't think that it's as bad, or, it's being
Mhm.
overblown, or people are using it as a cover to, sneak in different, things
Yeah.
to take over my life, kind of thing, which, again, I mean, if you sit back and think about it sort of logically, if you take, like, let's just take the mask situation, like this is somehow some kind of way to make you obey and like enforce control over the people or something. Like I mentioned before, we all cover our mouths when we cough. Like we're all taught that. So it's like we
Why
should,
is this one step further
yeah, we
all of a
should,
sudden
yeah,
like an
exactly.
authoritarian regime trying to take over the world?
Yeah.
Honestly,
And
I
the
can't tell
connection
you.
should be there, right? Like you said, like people have a connection with disease. They understand, more than maybe scientists give them credit for, that you cough, disease comes out, like that's a thing.
Mhm.
So it's that one to me is so curious to me as to why that one is sort of picking up steam in some groups. But then I'm looking at it and I'm thinking, well, in the terms of the coronavirus, the COVID stuff, sometimes it feels like these people just don't want to. There's a they've come so far into this group, and maybe it's, they get this really positive group identity feeling from being parts of these groups or something, but it's like they don't, it's gone beyond just I'm misinformed. It's I'm so far on this path that I don't like, doesn't matter what the information is. This is what I'm doing. This is what I, believe. I'm against this kind of thing. So I wonder how much of that is the distrust, this sort of innate distrust, or the intensity of the messaging, or there's so many factors going on. But
So something that I've kind of wanted to look into with that is what's the role in people wanting to kind of distort the messaging to be able to fit their own truth? And I had kind of wondered that a little bit with the way that the bushmeat messaging was interpreted in Sierra Leone, is that people didn't want to stop eating bushmeat because they knew that they relied on it. So I think that obviously you can't catch it from eating bushmeat. We've been through that. But like kind of forcing this, like, okay, well, we don't want to accept something that's going to make our lives more difficult either
mhm,
way. And I kind of see this almost kind of like flexibility in what you're like willing to accept versus not willing to accept based on like how convenient it is for you.
mhm.
And obviously, I personally don't feel like wearing a mask is a very big inconvenience for me. Um,
It's certainly
but
not
some
asking you to cut out
people
your one of your only sources of protein. It's not to that level.
exactly. It's like, let's just be real and say people are being a bit dramatic about that. But
Yeah.
I do think that it is kind of wanting to like, be like, well, I'm not willing to accept that because that's accepting that would force me to change the way I live my day-to-day life.
Mhm.
And that's a really hard pill for some people to swallow. Like they're going to kind of pick and choose this. And I guess I see this in some of my friends in Sierra Leone. So Sierra Leone's very split religion wise between Islam and Christianity.
Hmm.
Um, but it's pretty much exclusively Muslim in the area that I work in. And the Quran states that you shouldn't eat certain types of animals. They're not halal. So primates, anything with like a human like hand, you're not meant to eat. Predators, you're not meant to eat. And so I've discussed this with my friends before and said like, okay, well, I know, like we both know that you're eating monkey on a pretty regular basis. And I don't talk to people about like don't eat this, don't eat this. That's not my job. Even as a conservationist, that's not my job.
Hmm.
And so I'm chatting with my friend, like, okay, well, I know that you're actually a pretty strict Muslim. You won't smoke, you won't drink, but you will eat monkey. Now, why will you eat monkey? Like, why is this acceptable to you when, like, we both know that it's not um, advisable by the Quran? And I really hope that I'm using the word halal correctly because I don't want to mess that
Sure.
up.
Yeah.
Um, and he was like, well, God knows I'm hungry and he'll forgive me for this.
Hmm.
So it was kind of like, okay, well, where is that like level of okay, well, I'm willing to accept this. I shouldn't be drinking or smoking, but I'm not willing to accept that I shouldn't be eating monkeys because I feel that I need to continue to eat monkeys
Yeah.
to survive. Whether or not I personally believe that this particular friend needs to continue to eat monkeys to survive, or whether or not he just likes them. Everyone says the meat is very sweet because of how much fruit that they eat.
I've never
So
tried.
I am not aware if I have tried it,
Yeah.
but I have been accidentally fed some things before.
It's possible,
Um,
yeah.
yeah.
That's an interesting point though to me because I see that like I think that makes a lot of sense what I was just saying about the mass people, and obviously I still
Mhm.
think it's like, a pretty minor inconvenience and a little petty, but at least that psychology sort of makes sense to me that like we because I can admit that I'm as much as I try to be, logical and follow the rules surrounding corona and stuff too, for sure there's gaps in my thinking that are probably based on that same thing, and I've seen it in other people who are well intentioned, doing things to try and follow all the rules, but like you're washing your hands is an easy one, right? Like so it's like I come home, I wash my hands, that's easy, doesn't inconvenience me that much. Now, going out and meeting a friend, you know, I really want to do that. That's less of a, or it's more of
Exactly.
an inconvenience stuff. So you're willing to let that slide when what maybe we now know about coronavirus is that meeting people is more dangerous than washing your hands. But in your head, you can be like, well, I'm doing these things, like and our
I'm
memories
wearing my
are
mask.
always
Yeah.
false. We always like portray ourselves better and stuff. So that's a really, I feel like that's again like such a universal human thing that we're seeing, and that maybe we can all like as we, if we're the people that look at the Instagram videos of anti-mask people freaking out, which I may be one of those people, and sort of look at them with a bit of a sideways glance. It's good to remember that, I'm on a similar level. Like I might not be that far, but I'm on that
Yeah, it's a
spectrum.
spectrum of like okay, because you were kind of then bringing in this like intersection of like personal morality and science,
Hmm.
where at the end of the day, like, well, we're just going to be like, well, okay, and I do that. Like the thing that comes to my mind that I'm particularly bad about with like, okay, I know that this is the right thing to do is my recycling. I am really bad. Like sometimes if I'm like, oh, I'm gonna have to wash that out before I'm gonna have to recycle it. I'm just gonna be like,
Right.
"Oh, well, like, nobody's around, like, it's going in the bin."
Yeah. Yeah.
I'm like, being an environmentally minded person, I know that that's bad and that that's wrong, but I'm like, "Okay, well, I know that I do lots of good things, so I'm just gonna throw this in the bin." And that's kind of like almost in the way of like the same thing. Like, okay, well, yeah, I wash my hands, I wear my mask when I go to the shops, but I'm seeing my friends I haven't seen in a while, and I'd really like to give them a hug.
Yeah.
You know, and that's where we kind of are like, "Okay, well, we know that that's bad,
Hmm.
but we're all gonna kind of pick and choose, like, where our own line is." And
Right.
then, you know.
Yeah, and it's interesting from a for you to then I think of like sort of the biology and my background and sort of epidemiology, that I have. You think of like how it's kind of, I mean, obviously, doing some things is better than doing nothing. But like we've discussed, there's a hierarchy of things that you can do that are this is more risky, this is less risky, this will help you protect you more, this is more. But we
Mhm.
get this in our heads where it's like, well, I haven't been out for 7 days, and I've been washing my hands and doing all that. So just this one time should be fine because you feel like you've built up
Exactly.
protection when
Mhm.
really
That's not
anytime
how it
you
works.
do that, yeah, anytime you do that activity could be the time. Anytime, and so it's really
Exactly.
hard for us to grasp, which again I think is so interesting that, the connection between anthropology and psychology and this, disease outbreaks. There's such a
Mhm.
rich um area of research and thought, that we don't really consider a lot of times. And it's playing out in front of our eyes, so maybe this is sort of a wake-up call in terms of we do need more anthropologists and behavioral psychologists and stuff looking at these things, how we behave in these situations.
Well, I definitely know that I had to go through, like, my whole thesis and change, like, it's not if, but when another disease outbreak will happen, and be like, "Alright, crap, like, it's
Yeah,
happened." Backspace, like, reference 2020. Um,
yeah, yeah,
like, like, it's just yeah, I guess, like, in some ways, like, there have been people who've been, like, shouting from the rooftops, like, "Okay, this is gonna happen," and then it happens, and then we're all like, "Okay, we need this, like, abrupt cultural shift," and we're like, "If we all would've just been, like, being a little bit more mindful in, like, smaller ways for a longer period of time, we wouldn't have to ask people to do these massive
hmm
cultural shifts." And I think that it's, like, these cultural shifts, especially coming from COVID, are actually tackling a lot of, and I am American, so my a lot of my personal cultural references are gonna come from America, despite the fact that I've been living in the UK for a while now.
hmm
Um, this kind of culture of, like, coming into work when you're feeling a bit unwell.
yeah,
Um, and now all of a sudden we're like, "No, no, no, like, stay home, stay home, stay home, stay home." To an extent, I think that there's still companies out there who are like, "That's fine, come in anyways."
yeah,
Um, whereas, like, you might see in other places where, I've at least been hearing a lot more about this in, like, different parts of, in South Korea and Japan, like, if you are feeling unwell, it's a common courtesy to wear a mask
yeah.
just to not spread this sickness, which we know spreads through you breathing and coughing and sneezing on other people. But, like, in the States, all of a sudden, this is, like, this horrible idea of, like, how could we possibly cover our snot holes to protect other people? Like, um,
Yeah,
when and so I think that we've kind of, like, let these, like, slightly unhealthy things fester for a long time, and now it's trying to be like, "No, no, no. Stay home if you're sick. Don't work." Like, don't ask any of the people who were doing things like teaching on Zoom calls, like that poor woman in South America who died of COVID while teaching a Zoom lecture.
ugh,
We kind of need I think it's important that we kind of, like, take a step back and be like, "Look, how can we integrate, like, healthier behaviors in our everyday life so that we are not having to do this massive
yeah,
shift
yeah.
again?"
So that it's not like 0 to 100, it's just we can
Exactly.
live in a more balanced way. I mean, I feel like some of that is, obviously, coming from Canada, don't but I feel like Canada's kind of like a halfway point between Europe and America. We kind of lean
Mhm,
towards more America, in terms of the work culture. So this idea of, well, I really there's a deadline coming, so I really got to go to work, even if I'm feeling sick, and get that done and work overtime and sort of stress out your body and stuff that way. Is we have that in Canada, and now living here in Germany, you see the opposite where it is. It's like if you're sick, you don't go to work. Like, but,
mhm.
people also get plenty of coverage for sick days, and 30 days off every year. And,
Yeah.
like there's more of an emphasis on this idea of if we take care of people as a group,
Mhm.
we all chip in and pay for healthcare and stuff. And we do it in Canada too. We have the universal healthcare and stuff. it's like that's better in the long run, but we've sort of let these things erode, like you were saying, in some places, these sort of
Mhm.
ideas of how we can just live, you know, to buffer ourselves against these things. It's a yeah, it's a I feel like we could go forever on this space, and I'm looking forward to seeing, you know, your published work when it comes out and your thesis and stuff. I did want to talk to you though before I let you go about the Pan Versus project that you started, because this goes into your conservation work. Now, maybe I'm putting you on the spot because I didn't say I was going to talk to you about this, but I'd love for you to get that message out there for people, because it's, you know, your explorations of Ebola and, you know, the link to wildlife and stuff there too, sort of, it all kind of plays into this as well, that we have this cultural and just physical existence with animals, and how do we, you know, deal with this.
Yeah, so I created it's Pan Verus, and
Pan
it
Verus,
autocorrects
my
will
apologies.
change it to Versus all the time. You are not the first, and nor will you be the last. It's actually a play on words from the scientific name of the Western chimpanzee, which is Pan troglodytes verus, but also in
Okay.
kind of a Latin Greek, it means the whole truth. So
Oh,
we
okay, great.
don't look at conservation from one angle. We try to examine the whole truth of conservation. And we do a lot of community based and like community first conservation. And we're still a young organization. And I thoroughly believe that before you kind of jump into doing any actions, you need to thoroughly understand the environment that you're working in. Um, because of the civil war that was in Sierra Leone, there hasn't been a lot of wildlife research done in the country. So we do like wildlife conservation, we do or wildlife research, and then kind of conservation action. Um, and we've kind of been working our way towards figuring out what the best way to tackle kind of like human wildlife conflict essentially is seems to be the main driver, and then habitat loss. There's less than 4% of Sierra Leone's original forest cover remaining, and they are being massively targeted for logging, largely illegally for export to China, uh, for the African rosewood trade. Um, I mean, Sierra Leone's like natural resources have just been absolutely pillaged globally. For a long time, it was Europe, and then it was the States, and then now really it's China. China has a really strong hold on the environment, especially like all the seafood is just being like they are drag netting the crap out of the oceans in
Hmm.
Sierra Leone. Um, and so the national park that I do a lot of my work in was just really heavily targeted by this illegal logging. And within a year, I think they pretty much wiped out every rosewood tree that's in the national park.
Yikes.
And we see a lot of like humanitarian issues that kind of crop up with that. Like now there's not really any functional even pit toilets left in the park because there's such a massive influx of people that everything just kind of overflowed, and it's a bit
Oof.
that's quite unsanitary.
Yeah.
You see an increase in prostitution,
Hmm.
especially with like child prostitution and things like that. Um, and all for these logs which like no one's really getting much money for, like the youths, and I say youths in Sierra Leone is under 35s, they're being paid like the equivalent of like 50 cents a day to go and haul all of these logs, and then maybe the chiefs of the villages are getting 10 cents for every tree that's cut down.
Hmm.
So, like, no one's really getting any money on the ground level out of this. And then the elephants have been moving into people's fields because of all of this. So, we're trying to find alternative income sources. Basically, like, what are some jobs that we can help create for people that are not quite destructive? And by paying actual salaries to people, like
Yeah.
actual, like, at least minimum wage, and minimum wage in Sierra Leone is low for city living, but is astronomically high for the kind of like cash flow income that people in these rural economies were having before. I
Hmm.
mean, these people were not really seeing more than maybe 100 to $150 a year total move through their hands.
Wow.
and then to have the minimum wage salary, which just went up to being like 65 to $70 a month. We're able to kind of teach people skills that are a bit transferable, like computer skills, data entry, data collection, and then they can help us and actually make like money that's going to then kind of be distributed about around the village, because that's just how these communities work. And it's kind of environmentally friendly jobs that aren't dangerous and aren't illegal, like logging, and illegal, like gold mining. And so that's
Hmm.
kind of the first thing that everyone always wants. They're like, please help us find jobs, help us get, because there's just no jobs. There's something like 70% unemployment in Sierra Leone.
Hmm. Hmm. So,
Um,
I mean, this is like I've heard of this idea before, where it's like like a tree is worth more dead than alive. Like, how do we find ways to change that metric and provide jobs that are not destroying the environment?
mhm.
You went in and you said, you focus on knowing what these communities need and what they're about and stuff like that. So you have had, obviously they would like jobs, they would like to live, they would like to have this stuff. What is their sense of like what are their ideas, I guess, around how do we change this? Or are they kind of maybe just a bit exacerbated that like for years everything's just been taken from us, so like this is just the way it goes?
I think that especially when understanding a place like Sierra Leone, like, unfortunately, Sierra Leone, and I don't know if this is an official term, I should probably look it up. I always call it, it's like an aid economy.
Hmm.
Most of the jobs in that country are based off of, like, foreign aid and foreign, like, projects coming in,
Right.
and so there's absolutely no sense that, especially in these rural communities, that the government's gonna be doing any of these jobs, like providing education, providing healthcare, providing access to work. There's zero expectation that the government's gonna do that.
Right.
They expect that that can be done by the aid organizations that come in. So especially coming in as a foreigner, they're like, "Okay, well, are you here to build me a school?" I'm like, "No, I'm not here to build you a school." "Well, what's your point then?"
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah, yeah.
and they are exasperated because in the national park, even there, as I was, I walked to every village inside the Otamba section of the national park, and the park staff had not even been to every community that was inside this park, which is exasperating. Um, but they were like, "Oh, come look at this school that this project," which is UK based and quite a big project in Sierra Leone. It was actually recently visited by a member of the royal family in Sierra Leone.
Okay.
They're like, "Oh, look, this project has built us a school." And I'm like, "Well," and they're like, "Well, they didn't finish it, and they never gave us a teacher." So there's a bunch of concrete blocks, with a caved in roof, and there's like 3 or 4 of these, like, quote unquote schools inside the national park. I actually reached out to the organization. I was like, "Hi, I'm kind of curious, like, were you planning on finishing these schools? I'm curious to know how you got permission to build inside of a national park where that's illegal."
Mhm.
No response, obviously. Um, but these people in these communities are kind of used to that. They're, like, used to someone coming in saying, "Look, we're gonna do something for you," and then
Not
everyone just leave.
delivering. Yeah.
Yeah, or delivering something that's non-functional, or delivering something that nobody wants. Like,
Yeah.
um, the World Bank provided a just buckets of money to this national park, and they tried to do this, like, community, like, agriculture projects where they gave everyone pineapple plants, um, probably because they were hoping it would be kind of like a cash crop that they could sell.
Yeah.
But one of the biggest things that these people suffer from is animals coming onto the farms to look for food, because there's not enough forest left and not enough wild food left. Um, and do you know who loves pineapples?
I'm guessing
Monkeys.
wildlife, yeah.
Monkeys love pineapples. So what they did is they gave out 300 monkey magnets to this village, and no one there, one person still grows pineapple in
Yeah.
that village.
Yeah, yeah.
Like, what a waste. Did you not ask anyone? Like, do you know what I did? I went to that village and I said, "Hey, I'd like to buy you guys some seeds as like a thank you for like having me this year. What do you want?"
Yeah.
That's all it took. me going, "What do you want?" And they're like, "We want chili peppers." And I'm like, "That's not what I would have bought, but that's what they would like. So, okay, I'll go
Yeah.
get chili peppers." Like, that's not that hard.
Yeah, totally.
Uh,
What do you want? What do you need? What is it that
yeah,
Yeah.
monkeys don't eat chili peppers either.
Yeah, yeah. So it kind of comes down to this similar thing of just like not understanding the place that you're trying to help. Like even if your intentions are good, like let's say it's not because you have this condescending paternalistic view or whatever. It's just like lack of effort, kind of just not an
I
understanding of
think it is quite condescending and imperial, like, just kind of assuming that you know better when you're not taking the time to, like, listen to people and listen to what's going on in their life. Like, of course, I don't know better than these people about how to live in this environment. Yeah, I can say, "Please don't eat dead things that you find on the ground."
yeah.
But, pretty much past that, my knowledge is mostly useless to them. I grew up in kind of like a rural area, and my parents were very pro growing your own food.
Hmm.
And coming from South Florida, that means that I grew up actually growing a lot of the same things that the farmers that I work with grow. Not rice, I didn't grow rice.
Hmm.
Um, but I also know that they're completely dismissive of any knowledge that I have, and they should be. It's irrelevant. The way
Yeah.
that to grow papayas and mangoes in South Florida is not the way, and doesn't my knowledge doesn't mean anything there. Like, I don't know how to protect a papaya tree against a troop of monkeys coming in. But what we're trying to do is work with the community to running right now. We're monitoring for hopefully a full year. We're going to monitor the village's farmland to see like what animals are disturbing what crops to what extent to see if we can kind of shift and be like, okay, well, maybe we shouldn't try to grow X so much. We need to start growing Y because they're not as interested in Y as they
Right.
are in X. Rather than just saying like, okay, well, here's some shotguns, go protect your farms. We can just say like, okay, well, what's going to make everyone happy?
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I mean, it feels like there's this, you're coming at it from this place of like, yeah, trying to not just come in and tell people what to do. And I feel like that's the thing is like, because both sides of this equation, the local people in these communities that, we'll say Western countries are trying to help or like to make a show about, hey, we're helping.
Mhm,
um, Both sides actually do have relevant knowledge and things to bring to the table, right? Like it's like so
mhm,
you can't come in there and tell them how to farm in their ecosystem or what's best for their ecosystem. Like they know that stuff. But what you can bring to the table is resources in terms of money and an open mind to be like,
exactly.
where can my knowledge fit in? And I feel like there's just like
Mhm,
it's like lacking the humility, of being able to go in and say, like, look, on this turf, you know more than me. I'm going to bring a bunch of tools and, monitoring tools and some knowledge about data collection and things like that that might be able to help you and work together. Like that's such a like, again, it seems like such a simple process that we're just like missing on like a very large scale on a very large scale when it comes to foreign aid, when it comes to health initiatives, these kind of things.
yeah, I think people like to throw large amounts of money at problems, rather than kind of take the time to see whether and then because especially in those, like, that World Bank funded project, they didn't really care what was gonna happen 5 years down the line. They had their 3-year budget that they had to meet, and then they wanted to see what would happen by those 3 years, and then poof, everyone's gone, and everything that they did was is literally crumbling to dust. Like they spent like $1 million building a building. I don't know what they intended it to be used for, but it's like got like 15 bedrooms and like fully plumbed flushing toilets that don't work because there's no one within a 8-hour drive who would know how to fix
Right.
a plumbed toilet, and there's no way to get water to the like, it was just such a nonsensical thing, but it looks good, like, "Oh, look, we've built this," like that organization could say, "Look, we built 4 schools in this area." I'm like, you put up buildings
Yeah.
that didn't last more than 6 months, but that's not the same as a school."
Yeah.
And they kind of run off of this numbers game. Like that organization, they're like, we've built 6,000 schools in Sierra Leone, and I'm like,
Did you though?
none, almost none of them are functioning.
Yeah.
Um, They technically funded the school in the village that I spend a lot of my time, and there's no teacher there. There's like an 18-year-old volunteer who tries his best, but also like attended a 2-day course in being a teacher and doesn't show up that often
Yeah.
because he doesn't get paid. So why would he?
Yeah. I mean, it's like if the
Mm,
goal is to educate people, that should be the goal, right? Like, are we
mhm.
educating people and what is our metric for
Not
that rather
how
than
many schools have
building.
we built.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, exactly.
Mhm,
So it almost seems to me like we almost need anthropologists and stuff looking at the psychology of the
not
people who are
anthropologists
doing this stuff.
everywhere. Um, yeah, anthropology is great. Anthropology has a lot of flaws. It has a lot of ties back to, like, horribly colonialist practices and things like that.
Right.
But I think as long as you kind of acknowledge that and go into it being like, "Okay, well, how can I not continue that cycle?
Mhm. Mhm.
And how can I make this a collaborative learning experience for everyone? And how can then we best put those into practice in a way that's digestible and understandable and not, like, culturally shocking to the people that you are trying to probably incite behavior change or help, because that's what
Yeah.
disease communication is. We're trying to make people change their behaviors to not contract this disease.
Yeah, exactly. And I mean, it's like you see, you acknowledge the past. I mean, that happened. It has that past, that legacy. But what you're doing now is based in totally different, motives, which is the important thing. Maybe techniques or whatever maybe are similar, but the motives are different. And if you're coming in it with that open mind of like, I'm here to, maybe try and change some behaviors around this specific thing, but you can always be, as long as you're, I feel like as long as you're always turning that back on yourself too, then you could be like, well, what am I like? How am I changing? How am I learning? How am I growing? Then
Mhm.
it's like everybody's benefiting. Yeah.
Yeah. And I guess personally in the way that I try to, like, accomplish that within the Pan Verus project is, because I think about this a lot. I was on another podcast once, and they were like, "Oh, well, how long are you gonna stay there?" And I'm like, "I will keep working with the Pan Verus project as long up until a Sierra Leonean takes it over from me. That's
Yeah.
my goal.
Yeah.
Like, my goal, I'm not trying to, like, build this career off of this project. I only started it because this national park was kind of falling apart before my eyes, and I just wanted someone to pay attention to it.
Hmm.
And I hope that that's largely led by if not entirely led by Sierra Leoneans as soon as possible.
Right.
That's my goal. My goal and what I feel like my job is to use the privilege that I've had to get, like, 10 years of higher education, um, and help people kind of be able to use that to benefit their own, like, where they're from and, their own environment, their own culture, and their own wildlife.
Yeah, exactly. Well, it's great. So, the Pan Verus, did I say it right? Pan Verus
Yes.
project.
Panverus.
And
Verus.
that's the website too, right? Pan Verus?
Panverus.org.
Right. And I believe there's a
And,
donation page on there.
yeah, if you guys wanna donate, is that's mostly going towards salaries right now, because we're not having any super formal research projects running, because of COVID, but we're trying to keep up all of our salaries,
Hmm.
especially right now because the economy in Sierra Leone is not doing fantastic, and that income means a lot to the people that, receive it.
Yeah, great. Pan Verus. And I mean, I've started following the website because there's a blog on there, I think, too. You're writing stuff there. I got you on Twitter. If you want to give your Twitter out or not to to the people, that's up to
Yeah,
you.
no, follow me on Twitter, follow me on Instagram. I use the same handle for all of them, and it's at Sarah's Gone Wild. Sarah is spelled with an H.
Cool.
Yeah,
Yeah,
give me a follow.
I'll put all that out on our website and stuff too because it's really interesting work. And like I said, I'm interested to see what comes of the thesis and sort of the stuff that you're finding out about messaging, health messaging, some misinformation. It was a really fascinating conversation for me. I really appreciate you taking the time and good luck with the thesis. I know what that's like. So good luck with the
Thank
final
you, I
push.
definitely need it. Uh It's the end is nigh. I am just hoping to get it done very soon.
Wow, what a chat. I've always been fascinated by the idea that, outbreaks are these sort of cultural events as much as they are biology. It's how we behave in these events that make them so fascinating to me. So that was a really, really interesting conversation for me. I hope you enjoyed it as well. Many thanks again to Sarah Bell. Check her out on Twitter, Sarah's Gone Wild. Check out the Pan Verus Project, panverus.org. And of course, rate, subscribe, follow us. Subscribe to the podcast, leave a rating, leave a comment, all of that great stuff. Twitter, at 2brad4u or at bvampird on Instagram is the same handle. Thank you so much for listening. Love you guys, and we'll see you next time. Bye for now.